First of all, I must begin this by saying I didn't want to come to Gibraltar to live. 10 years ago, I was happily settled into life in West Yorkshire on an extended career break owing to the arrival of our first two sons. We were living in our forever family home. We'd moved around quite a lot since starting a family. We started off in Yorkshire, moved to Lancashire, up to County Durham, and then back down to Yorkshire, all because of my husband's work. And we were in our fifth home in 5 years and had no intentions of moving anywhere anytime soon. It had taken quite a while to get established where we were. We'd appealed to get our eldest son into a really good, newly built school just over the fields from where we lived. Neither of us are from that part of the world, and we had no close family or close friends nearby to support us. It had taken a year of going to toddler groups and a year of my eldest son being at school before I'd chipped through and managed to get invited out for coffee by one of the other mums instead of just a cheery hello at the school gates. We were an hour's drive from my parents as well, so that worked well for weekly visits and babysitting. We were sorted. That was the end of 2008, when my husband came home from work one day and said, "We're moving to Gibraltar." "No, we're not," was my answer. Why would I go there? I knew nothing about the place. And we were settled. We didn't want to move anywhere. He explained, though, that if we didn't move, there was a very good chance he was going to lose his job. And as he wouldn't be able to get another job in his field where we lived, we were going to have to move anyway. So the deal was done, even though I'd offered to work night shifts in a 24-hour supermarket to supplement the income. So we made our first scheduled visit to Gibraltar in January 2009. It was for me to see Gibraltar for the first time, to find somewhere to live and to look at schools for our eldest. Before we flew here, I was Googling Gibraltar like mad. There wasn't as much online about Gibraltar back then as there is now. All I could find out was that it was a huge, great big rock. The policemen and women looked quite familiar. There were red phone boxes, apes and fish and chips. And there were some very shiny apartments for sale in a place called Ocean Village, which was a far cry from our 3-bed semi on the outskirts of Wakefield. We left the snow behind us and our children. As we set off on that first visit, my dad battled up country lanes to get our eldest to school, which turned out to be closed because of the bad weather, and we arrived in rather warmer climes, but under the cover of darkness. The following morning, I looked out of my hotel room window at the Elliott and could see the densely packed buildings in front of me and this huge, great big rock above. I didn't know what to make of the place at all. That first day, we were taken to view 17 different properties, both here in Gibraltar and over the border in Spain. I ruled out Spain pretty much straight away. The commute for my husband, for one, the language barrier, I only did French at A-level, not Spanish, and the fact that there were no pavements outside any of the properties. How would I take my toddler for a walk with no pavements? And how on earth would I make friends as a stay-at-home mum? Gibraltar won over on every score except the housing, but I'd take a community I could interact with easily over a house with a garden any day. Whilst travelling around with the relocation people, I asked what facilities there were for families with young children in Gibraltar. "Oh, there aren't any," was the answer. "Oh, well, it's going to be boring then," was my thoughts on the matter. We found somewhere to live, an apartment, of course, so goodbye garden and garage. And my husband moved over in the May. I followed with the boys in August that year once school had finished and we'd packed up our home and rented it out. Before the removal men left that day, after unloading countless boxes, I asked them to give me a quote for how much it was going to cost us to move back in 2 years' time. That was my deal, 2 years only. I started saving straight away. Thankfully, my parents came over with us, helped us with the unpacking and the boys. Without their help, I think I would have been on the first monarch out of here. The first thing I noticed about Gibraltar, apart from the heat and the blue sky, was the bureaucracy. Summer hours, endless queues in hot, sweaty offices with restless children, and always, it seemed, getting to the front of the queue only to find out I had one piece of paperwork missing and I had to come back the next day and do it all again. I wasn't falling in love with the place. We heard our son had got into St Mary's first school on the last day of the school summer holidays and had just one day to go and buy his uniform before he started school on the Monday. There's nothing like a last-minute dash for uniform to add to the stress levels. At the end of that first day, though, I was approached outside school by a mum who was full of apologies because her son had taken some birthday party invitations into school and they weren't expecting my son to be in the class. She said, "Don't worry, tomorrow there'll be an invitation," and sure enough there was. Within a week, we were immersed in a full-on Gibraltarian children's party in a social club with the whole family there, and we were answering a million questions. Who we were, where we'd come from, what we were doing here, etc. We felt included and wanted, and that was really nice. Then a couple of weeks later, my son's teacher, Miss Daly, who is legendary in our house, took me aside at the end of school and said, "Now, Mrs. Weston, we've settled your son into school. What can I do to help you and your husband settle into life in Gibraltar?" I was astonished. In our 1 year in a UK school, I'd seen my son's teacher twice by appointment only. And so, this huge difference between the UK and Gibraltar was amazing, and our gradual immersion into the Gibraltarian community had begun. Now, remember what I said about when we came to look around and I was told there were no facilities for families with young children? Well, that was clearly wrong. There was a toddler group at Europa, the Monkey Capers, and another one at Chiltern Court, and there were a couple of musical groups for children too. It did take a bit of detective work to find them because Facebook and social media wasn't quite what it is today. It was more a case of looking on notice boards and word of mouth to find out what was happening. Now, along with a couple of friends who moved to Gibraltar that same summer, with the same work relocation, we decided to set up a toddler group of our own. We didn't think it was fair that the MOD should have to provide the only toddler groups in Gibraltar, and we wanted to create a community one too. One of those friends had an association with Holy Trinity Cathedral, and they very kindly offered us some room at the back of the church for storage and space to run the playgroup. We started small. We asked just a few families we knew to come along so we could wrangle the toddlers and figure out the logistics of keeping toddlers into a small part of a very large church. That was in Easter 2010. In September 2010, we opened to the public, and it took off. Trinity Toddlers Craft and Play was born. Some weeks, we got in excess of 35 families turning up. Many of them had multiple children, so you can imagine the level of noise that we would have on Tuesdays or Wednesday mornings. I spent 6 years as a volunteer with Trinity Toddlers before we handed it over to its current leader, Gemma, who has taken it from strength to strength in various locations, and it's now based in the Children's Centre in Mid Harbours. During that time, my deadline of 2 years had been and gone. Work was going well for my husband, we were settled again as a family, and baby boy number 3 arrived in the summer of 2011. Not long after his arrival, I was approached by Ewan McLean, the minister at St Andrew's Church of Scotland, to ask me if I wanted a voluntary job. My mum's from Scotland, and although I was brought up a Methodist, when I set foot in St Andrew's, I felt like I'd gone home. I spent many childhood summer holidays in Glasgow visiting my gran and went to her church on Sundays. So St Andrews became a bit of a home from home, a sanctuary, something familiar when everything around me was unfamiliar when we first arrived. Ewan knew of my background as a broadcast journalist in local radio, and he was looking for someone to help work as a press officer for a charity he was involved with. I started doing a bit of media work then for the Vine Trust Gibraltar, which was behind a team of volunteers who travelled out to Tanzania to help build schools and medical facilities and homes. And as well as that, they were converting an old Royal Navy ship into a floating hospital, which was eventually transported to Lake Victoria in Tanzania to help offer medical care to the communities around the lake who otherwise wouldn't receive it. It felt good to be using my brain again for something other than running a home, a family and a toddler group. Little did Ewan know what he'd started though, as it got me thinking about a return to work. I wasn't sure how I'd do it with 3 children and a husband who works long hours and is often away overseas and no other family support, but I started thinking about it more and more. While I wholeheartedly believe I did the right thing, giving up work to look after my family, it does dent your self-confidence and being able to do things outside the home when you stay away from work for a long time. A few years ago, in fact, a few days ago, I would never have imagined I would be standing here speaking to you. Following on from my work with the Vine Trust, Polly Lavarello, the creator and editor of Mum on the Rock, contacted me and asked if I'd like to write some articles for her online magazine. It was quite a change from what I'd been used to. I was trained in the BBC and at university to write for radio and television, and to write for print is a completely different discipline and pushed me right out of my comfort zone. As did going to report and mingling with politicians and important people that I wouldn't normally have encountered in my life at a toddler group. I felt a bit like a fish out of water after more than a decade at home with the children. Then a job was advertised on Facebook for a newsreader for GBC television. One of the girls who'd started Trinity Toddlers with me tagged me in the post, so I applied. I had nothing to lose. I got the job. I started reading the news on Newswatch in April 2017, and I absolutely loved it. Being part of a team again, being Lindsay again, and not just mummy, was a huge adjustment after 13 years at home. I was made to feel so welcome at GBC. I felt I was a valued member of the team, even though I just walked through the door, and so many of my colleagues were GBC veterans. 6 months later, Radio Gibraltar advertised a part-time weekend presenter job. I applied for that, and I got that one too. It was to be the Sunday breakfast presenter, and that was a whole new experience for me. When I worked at BBC Radio Sheffield, my last station before having children, it was in a full-time reporter or producer role, working towards the following morning's breakfast programme or that evening's drive time programme. I also worked as a reporter in a district office in Doncaster, Rotherham and Chesterfield, effectively in a broom cupboard at the back of the town hall. It meant I had to think on my feet, generate stories and get contacts so I could get good stories on the radio. Despite all of that work, I'd never done much presentation other than as one half of a 2-presenter NewsHour show, and I certainly didn't know how to drive a radio studio desk. All of that had to be absorbed before I started my first show in November 2017. I love my job as a radio presenter. It feels like I'm back doing what I was meant to do. But there was something missing. What I loved most of all when I was a reporter was being out in the field meeting people, helping them to tell their stories, giving them a voice to promote their cause, be it a charity or an awareness campaign or whatever. I couldn't commit to a full-time reporter job now with my family commitments, but I could do it on my own. With the support of my family, I embarked on a new project, Gibraltar Stories, an audio podcast. My husband and the boys gave me the moral support, and my brother has given me tech support, and without that, I wouldn't be here today. So thank you both. So often during my time here, I've come across stories and events which I would have given my eye teeth for when I was a district reporter sitting in a broom cupboard. Life stories, historical events, community initiatives, all of which I would have loved to have covered as a reporter. Finally, last summer, I heard of something which I just had to take further. I read that this year is the 50th anniversary of the frontier closure. I'm ashamed to admit that we'd lived here in Gibraltar for 5 years before I even heard of it happening. If I hadn't heard of it, I bet there's an awful lot of people out there who haven't heard of it either. I get really frustrated when I see Gibraltar described as this slice of kitsch Britishness, all red phone boxes and fish and chips. And the longer I'm here, the more I learn about Gibraltar, and there's still so much still to discover. The tunnels, the history, the sieges, all these things that we take for granted as part of our everyday life. I feel passionate that the real Gibraltar should be out there for the world to see. I want to tell real stories, and there are so many. The people who've represented Gibraltar on the world stage, those who contribute to the fact that Gib punches above its weight in so many ways, the stories of bravery, of history, which is either unknown beyond these shores or simply forgotten. That is my Gibraltar story, my gift to Gibraltar. The place I didn't want to come to, but which welcomed me with open arms and allowed me to make it my home. Thank you.